Hello everyone, my name is Vinay. I'm from Communications and Signal Processing stream in Electrical Engineering, IIT Madras. As a part of the course E5004, Seminar on the History of Electrical Engineering, I'm going to present a seminar on the history and development of satellite communications. The history of satellite communications is rich, that it began centuries ago with the efforts to interpret the meaning of the term wandering planets among the stars, to understand among the stars and to understand the structure of cosmos. The early scientists such as Sir Isaac Newton and others, and the writers of this speculative fiction both contemplated the idea that humans might one day launch artificial satellites into the orbit for practical purposes. So this idea of communicating through satellite first appeared in a short story titled The Brick Moon, which is written by an American author, Edward Everett Hale, in the year 1869. It was published by the Atlantic Monthly Magazine in 1870. So in that story, The Brick Moon, an artificial moon was built by bricks, and it had a diameter of around 70 meters, which is launched into the Earth's orbits. And this brick moon aided mariners in navigation, as people sent Morse code signals back to Earth by jumping up and down on the satellite surface. So this was the first time which communication through satellites was appeared in a book. And until 1945, the idea of sending radio messages into the space and around the world was the concept of a science fiction, was like a science fiction concept. Till this man, Sir Arthur Clarke, first introduced the practical concept of satellite communication when he was 27 years old during the time of World War II. So he is Sir Arthur Clarke, and little information about him. He was a British Royal Air Force officer. He was a radar technician who initially was appointed as the aircraft hand radio wireless mechanic. Then he was promoted as a flight lieutenant, and he is also in charge of training programs at MIT Rand Labs. And he also worked with Luis Walter Alvarez, a Nobel laureate. He is a physicist who worked on the discovery of resonance states in particle physics using hydrogen bubble chamber. So he got Nobel Prize for that, and Sir Arthur Clarke worked with him. And as the World War II was ending, Arthur C. Clarke used to write technical papers with the title "The Future of World Communications" and sends to the Wireless World magazine. So this paper was published. So his writings was published by the Wireless World magazine with the title "Extraterrestrial Relays: Can Rocket Stations Give Worldwide Radio Coverage?" in the year 1945. So this he proposed that this was the first thing which outlined the principles of global broadcasting via communication satellites. And then he also proposed that a satellite at an altitude of 35,786 kilometers above from the Earth's surface would be moving at the same speed as of Earth's rotation. At this altitude, the satellite would remain in a fixed position relative to Earth, which is now called as a geostationary orbit. This orbit is ideal for satellite communications as the antenna on the ground can be pointed to a satellite 24 hours a day without having to track its position. And then he also calculated that 3 satellites spaced equidistantly in geostationary orbit would be able to provide radio coverage, full radio coverage through the entire Earth, except at some of the polar regions. Next, on 17 December 1984, a chief Soviet rocket scientist, Sergei Korolev, proposed a developmental plan for an artificial satellite. So he was a rocket scientist, and he was the main engineer to construct this Sputnik 1 satellite, Sputnik 1, the communication satellite. And this satellite, so this was the turning point. So this was a turning point in the field of the communication satellites. So October 4th, 1957 was the day when the Soviet scientists made things more real. So this Sputnik 1 satellite was of 58 centimeters in diameter and 4 antennas sending low frequency radio signals. So it was of the beach ball size, which uses 4 antennas for sending low frequency radio signals at regular intervals. So it orbited Earth in elliptical orbits, taking 96.2 minutes to complete one revolution. Actually, it is launched into the LEO orbit, lower Earth orbit. So it transmitted signals around 22 days until its battery ran out and was in orbit for 3 months. So this launch of Sputnik 1 sparked the beginning of the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then these two scientists, John Pierce and Harold Rosen, so they are American engineers. John Pierce was an electrical engineer in American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, AT&TC, Bell Laboratories. And Harold Rosen was an electrical engineer in Hughes Aircraft Company. So they developed key technologies that made the commercial satellites more possible. And some important contributions of Sir John Pierce and Harold Rosen. John Pierce outlined the principles of satellite communications in an article titled Orbital Radio Relays. It was published in the year 1955, April, in an American magazine. So in that, he calculated the precise power requirement to transmit the satellites in various orbits. And also his main contribution is this. So contribution was the development of the traveling wave tube, which enabled the satellites to receive, amplify, transmit the radio signals. So this was his main contributions. And then Harold Rosen, he developed spin stabilization technology that provided stability to satellites orbiting in space. So this was his main contribution. And then The fact that the Soviet Unions were successful fed fears in the US military and had fallen behind in developing the new technology. So, uh, like, yeah, had fallen, like the US military has fallen behind the Soviet Union in developing the new technology. So the US Congress has proposed the NAS Act by then President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was also an American military officer, which led to the found, which led to NASA in 1958. So, as Dwight D. Eisenhower, uh, who was then president and also a military officer, founded NASA in the year 1958. So it embarked on a program to develop satellite technologies. And the first project for and first NASA's project was Echo 1. So it was developed by AT&T's Bell Laboratories, which was led by John Pierce at Bell Labs. So it was a passive satellite which just reflected the signals from the ground. And Echo 2 was also launched, which was also a passive satellite. And then after Echo 1 and Echo 2, so they were credited with improving the satellite tracking and grounding station technologies that was to prove indispensable later in the development of active satellite systems. The turning point, the first in the NASA's projects was Telstar 1 in 1962. So it was launched by Pierce. It was developed by Pierce team in Bell Labs and launched by NASA using a Delta rocket into the LEO lower Earth orbit of the Earth. So it transmitted. So this is the Telstar 1 satellite. So it is the first two-way communication satellite. And it was the first satellite to transmit the live television images between Europe and North America. And it was also the first satellite to transmit the first phone call via a satellite. The call was from AT&T's chairman Frederick Kapal and to the ground station in Andover, Maine, to US President Lyndon Johnson in Washington, D.C. On the other side, Harold Rosen's team at Hughes Aircraft attempted to launch the first satellite in geostationary orbit. SYNCOM 3, the first satellite to launch into the geostationary Earth orbit. SYNCOM 1 was launched in the year 1963, Feb, was lost shortly after the launch, so it was unsuccessful. And SYNCOM 2 was the first satellite which was sent into the geosynchronous orbit, which is an orbit which is inclined to the equator. And SYNCOM 3 was the satellite which is sent into the geostationary orbit in July 1963. So SYNCOM 3 was the satellite which broadcasted the 1964 Olympic Games from Tokyo, Japan to US, the first major sporting event broadcasted via satellite. And since then, Rosen was called as the father of geostationary satellites. After the successful development of satellite technology in US, it laid the in US and other parts of the world, it paved the way for global communications satellite industry. The United States spearheaded the development of the satellite communications industry with the passing of Communication Satellites Act in 1962. This act authorized the formation of the Communication Satellites Corporation, which is called ComSat, a private company that would represent the United States in an international satellite communications consortium called Intelsat. So the uh, first project from the Intelsat was the early bird or Intelsat 1, which is also called as the Intelsat 1. Was the first operational commercial satellite providing regular telecommunications and broadcasting services. So early bird was followed by Intelsat 2B and 2B, launched in 1967, covering the Pacific Ocean. So this is the Intelsat satellite. And Intelsat 3 was launched in 1969, covering the Indian Ocean. So Intelsat satellites in geostationary orbit provided nearly the global coverage, except at the polar regions. These three satellites provided the coverage over the entire Earth. So 19 days after Intelsat 3, F3 was placed over the Indian Ocean, the landing of the first human on the moon on July 20th, 1969 was broadcast live through the global network of Intel satellites to over 600 million television viewers. So, this Intelsat 3 F3 satellite captured the landing of first human, Neil Armstrong, who landed on moon first in the year 1969, July 20. Then the other side, the Soviet Union continued its development of satellite technologies with the Molniya series satellite. The first satellite in this series, Molniya 1, was launched in April 23, 1965. And then within a span of 2 years, by 1967, 6 Molniya satellites provided coverage throughout the United Soviet Union. During the 50th anniversary of Soviet Union in 1967, the annual parade in the Red Square, was broadcast nationwide via the Molniya satellite. And in 1971, the Intersputnik International Organization of Space Communications was formed by several communist countries led by the Soviet Union. The potential applications of satellite for development and their ability to reach remote regions led other countries to build and operate their own national satellite systems. So after US and Soviet Union, Canada was the first country to launch the communication satellites. So Canada launched Anik 1 in 1972, November 9, was its first communication satellite. And then Indonesia launched its first communication satellite in 1976, July 8. It is called Palapa. And then India launched its first communication satellite called Apple, which is Ariane Passenger Payload Experiment. So Apple was an experiment communication satellite successfully launched from Kourou, French Guiana in 1981. It was boosted into the geosynchronous orbit by ISRO's own Apogee motor. So it gave ISRO's valuable hands-on experience in designing and developing 3-axis stabilized geostationary communication satellite. So Apple marked the dawn of India's satellite communications era. And INSAT and GSAT. INSAT and GSAT are the prominent in satellite systems for telecommunication services. INSAT, little information about INSAT. The INSAT has commissioned in 1983 which is the largest domestic communication system in Indo-Pacific region. So it was a joint venture of the Department of Space, Department of Telecom, Indian Meteorological Department, and All India Radio and Doordarshan. So INSAT has 9 INSAT satellites serve the television and communication needs of India. And as of now, we have 9 operational communication satellites placed in the geostationary orbit. And then GSAT, geostationary satellites. So geostationary satellite program. GSAT was a geostationary satellite program which was instituted in 1999, 2000, around 1999, 2000. They were India's indigenously developed communication satellite used for digital audio, data, and video broadcasting to make India self-reliant in broadcasting services. So INSAT and GSAT are 2 prominent satellite systems that are primarily dedicated to support the telecom services for India's needs. And then CMS-1 is the recently launched communication satellite. So it replaced GSAT-12 satellite and provides services in extended C-band of the frequency spectrum. It has 42 communication satellites. It is the 42nd communication satellite launched from Sriharikota spaceport in the year 2020 through PSLV C-50. So it was launched into the geosynchronous transfer orbit. It will provide the telecom services in extended C-band of the frequency spectrum. It includes the Indian mainland, Andaman, Nicobar, and Lakshadweep Islands. It will cover these regions, and the lifespan we are expecting is around 7 years for this. And in a relatively short span, that is in 64 to 65 years, starting from 1957 to now, the satellite technology has developed from experimental to sophisticated and powerful one. So in future, the communication satellites will have more onboard processing capabilities, more power, large aperture antennas, and will enable satellites to handle more bandwidth. Further, improvements in satellite propulsion and power systems will increase their service life to 20 to 30 years from the current, which is around 10 years. The demand for more bandwidth, coupled with the continuing innovation and development, will ensure the long-term viability of the commercial satellites and the commercial satellite industry well into the 21st century. Thank you very much.